Hey Dratnos, would you like to do some alt keys later this evening?
Yeah, sure. Just give me a couple months to get ready.
A couple months, but Dratnos, isn't Shadowlands very alt friendly?
So we've been led to believe, but in fact, there are actually quite a lot of systems that are not necessarily individually rough for getting alts up together, but kind of in aggregate, there's just so much. There's such a daunting hill ahead of you. Now, Blizzard has been making some moves in favorable directions with these things.
Yes.
They've been tweaking things around the edge, but still, that kind of the whole sum of it is still pretty rough.
Yeah, and one of those things that they have been tweaking, like you mentioned, are the conduits, which now will grant you conduits based on your spec instead of your class, which is, I mean, I play a druid, so I'm very happy about this, but
Yeah,
it's something that many would argue that should have come earlier, although I'm very happy to have it now.
yeah, conduits dropping has always been, and legendaries dropping. All of these sorts of things have dropped this expansion based just on your class rather than on your spec, which
Mm-hmm.
uh there's reasons for that, but it does lead to this kind of awkward experience of like you're hoping you get your one and then you just get one for a spec you never play. And it feels like you're just not making the progress you want. So this is a big buff, especially for druids, 4 times faster to upgrade your one main spec. For demon hunters, only 2 times faster, and for everybody else, 3 times faster.
Yeah, but I mean, even as addressed in this blue post, they talk about how it's frustrating for you to get a conduit for a spec that you may never use. I think this is actually a really good change for the conduit system in general. Although, like you said, there's a lot of other systems that are still just in this gray area for it takes you a while, and we joked about it being multiple months, but it does take you a very long time to get completely caught up with something that is main ready.
Yes, that's the thing is, there's a couple different elements to this, right? An alt shouldn't catch up all the way to where a main is, right? That's the difference between a main and an alt, right? If you want your
Yeah.
alt to be as good as a main, you should have to play it a lot, right? But I think that in previous expansions, they've had a better balance of, your alt, if you put in, there should be some good upfront rewards you can get to catch your alt most of the way towards your main. And this patch, it feels like you're kind of always behind. You're always in catch up on like 6 different systems, right? There's the renown system,
Hmm.
which not just for alts, even for characters you played last patch, right? A lot of those want to play a different covenant this patch. I've had that experience on most specs that I've been like, hey, I want to play this patch. I've looked at it and it's like, oh, actually, I kind of wish I was a different covenant. But then you're looking at a renown grind that, yeah, they've sped up the early renown acquisition, but they've also doubled the amount of renown that you have to grind. So that kind of cancels out, and you're still looking at a very long grind ahead of you on that one.
Yeah, I mean, you also have conduits, which I mean, I would say that that system is a lot better after today's changes, but still, it
So
takes a while to catch up because of Archivist Codex research.
the thing is, yeah, so you can buy conduits and sockets once you have a main at tier 6, which I think is good, but you still need like 100,000 to 150,000 cataloged research to buy yourself a set of sockets and all of your conduits, even for just a main spec. It is a lot of upgrades to get all the way there. Like that, while you were doing that grind, you would have hit tier 6 on Archivist Codex anyway.
Yeah.
They've kind of shifted, they front loaded a little bit because you can buy your sockets nice and quick. But if you do actually have designs on getting your conduits up, which, that is a thing you can just forgo on your alts, but still, if you'd rather not, that grind is incredibly long.
Another thing, it's not just about legendary crafting. Legendary crafting and Torghast, they did make it a little bit better this patch, just getting you up to those a decent level of legendary crafting. But the acquisition of the legendary powers is one that is a bit weird, especially whenever some of them are locked behind things like, I don't know, Stone Legion generals killing and
Yeah.
stuff like that. You're like, huh. Or world bosses and stuff. You're like, I guess.
So if anybody is like actually on a long-term alt plan, here's a little tip for what you can do with this. If you get your anima conductor and you conduct anima 40 times, right? So that takes a month plus an extra week. Then you can buy a memory of a legendary you don't already have for the low price of 3,500 anima. So if you really, if you know you want to play an alt, but you don't need to do it in the short or medium term, you can do that and avoid having to LFR Castle Nathria to get your legendary powers.
But But you have the LFR Castle and Atheria for most other people who want to play an alt.
Almost everybody is going to end up doing that, yeah, to actually get their power this month.
That plus the world boss, I would say those are weird things for you to be having to get your legendary powers gated behind stuff that is older content in that regard.
Yeah, the main thing is that you have to wait for the correct world boss from the initial Shadowline cycle, which couple specs do have good ones, right? Like Elemental Shaman, you'd like to get your one off the right boss, and you're just there like that.
Is Disciplinary Command from a world boss, or is that the one that's not from the world? Okay, anyways, continue. Moving on. Shards of Domination, and then like the sockets from Raid. I would say that the sockets from Raid is the least egregious part, because normally people aren't complaining about gear that they get from Raid specifically. Although it's a bit tough on that element. I would say that the shards are the biggest issue for me personally. You look like you disagree though.
I do. I think that it is the fact that there are these two that you both need to get, right? It's like you not only need to roll a 6, right? But you need to roll 2 6s, right? You need to actually make it so that you can have both of these line up, right? You need to hit the correct shards and get the socketed pieces in your gear slots, and then grind the raid for for embers to upgrade them. It's a lot of stuff that is up in the air, and it means for alts you're looking at, if you actually want to interact with the system, many weeks of clearing the raid on a character that maybe that wasn't something they really intended to do.
Exactly.
Or in the past you do like one heroic, right, and you get a lot of gear, and you don't really have to go back to heroic. This time around it's a lot less like that. Again, I don't have a problem with alts that don't do raid being worse geared than mains that do raid and alts that do raid, but again, you're looking at this like the month and a half grind unfolding in front of you in all these different categories at the same time.
So how would you feel if they brought back tier sets? Would you feel kind of similar, or do you think it would be a little bit different?
Again, the thing about tier sets though is that it is just that one item drop, right? So instead of needing those 3 factors, right, getting your shard drop, upgrading your shard, and getting the socket to put it in, you just would have the one thing of
it's just a piece of gear
and get this loot, and that's much more manageable, right? If you're just like, hey, I need to kill the 9 and Guardian because those drop the tier piece I don't have each week. You just open up LFG, right, and you're like, you look for heroic the 9 group, you go do that, right? That's a much less daunting prospect than like, hey, I need to full clear this raid because I need domination sockets that drop from several bosses, I need shards that drop from every boss, and I need Stygian Embers that drop from every boss and mini boss as well in the raid.
Yeah, and then of course we have normal sockets, which we've had last patch as well. I would say this falls in the same situation as conduits, about the same thing, where it's going to be about the research, right?
I think that this is in a pretty good place. I think the sockets on alts are like they're low impact enough that if you don't have your sockets because you don't want to farm Korthia for a couple weeks, it doesn't feel as bad. It does compound with the other stuff. It's one more factor, right? Being 2% behind is fine.
It's fine.
30 instances of being 2% behind, and now you're way behind, right? And so this is one of those, but of them, I think this is the one that is done the best for alts.
In Valor and Conquest?
So Valor is an interesting point, right? Because Valor, I think last patch was an extremely alt-friendly system.
Yeah.
But this season, the upgrades from Valor are tied behind your character's M+ score rather than tied behind your account's Keystone Master achievement. Which means that if you're interested in using Valor to upgrade your gear to that heroic raid / halfway between heroic and mythic raid item level, you need to actually get every dungeon done on both tyrannical and fortified weeks on your alts, right? So
it's a minimum of 10 dungeons or 8 dungeons twice, and you have to do it on 2 separate weeks. So it is, I would say that is kind of a lot of dungeons to expect somebody to do for an alt. Although it does come down to like, what is the expectation of that alt character gear wise?
Right, exactly. Like, I wouldn't mind if you had to do something like that in Raid or Korthia or M+, right? But it kind of feels like you need to do it in Raid and Korthia and M+ and Torghast, right? So it's the fact that all those systems are stacked on top of each other and they're all kind of cross-connected, that I think makes it worse. Because, when people were originally talking about the dungeon score being required for Valor upgrades, I think there was a lot of unwarranted complaints about how hard it would be to get Keystone Master with the change and needing to do Tyrannical and Fortified. And I really don't think it it was bad for mains, but I do think it's bad for alts.
It's just long more than anything else. It's not like that hard because 15s this patch, it feels like they're a decent bit easier, but at the same time, just getting 16 dungeons done across 2 separate weeks. If you're not like, okay, so say you are playing in a consistent 5-person group, I would say that that's even going to take longer than if you're just slamming it through LFG for the key you need specifically. And it's an alt character at the end of the day, right? For a main, this is a fine thing. For an alt, you probably shouldn't need it on both weeks at minimum, right?
Conquest gearing in a pretty good spot, I would say, for alts, especially if your character is mainly interested in PvPing, because the conquest gear is pretty good.
Yeah. I think Conquest is a really good spot.
Yeah. I don't know. In terms of how we would rather see this sort of thing evolve, I think that they need to take a hard look at systems like when they took essences and made them account wide. I think that really did a good job of taking the alt grind from being as much as the main grind down to being like half as much, and you got to choose which content you were doing, right? And that was nice. I think that that's a good place to land, because right now it feels like the alt grind is pretty much the same grind as the mains had, at pretty much the same level of intensity, pretty much the same level of rigidity to what content you had to do. And I think that the game is best when alts, especially alts multiple months into a patch, are a much more flexible experience.
Yeah, I think ultimately they just kind of needed to chop down on the time a little bit, like you said. I think that one of the biggest things is that they will come back and they will probably do something to make alts a lot more friendly, but it always feels like they do it just so late.
Right, like now would be a good time. Now would be, I'd give a lot of credit to getting it done now, right? It's a month into the patch, a month and a half, I guess. A great time to make that sort of adjustment. If we get it 5 months into the patch, that's the kind of thing where it's like, all right, the time when we could have been having fun on alts is largely past, right?
Yes.
And now it's just a prep mechanism for next patch, and that I think is a lot worse than having this patch be good. Which there's still time on that for alts, but I don't know. Another thing we didn't even talk about was all the delightful campaign quests for both your Covenant campaign and the Korthia campaign.
Having to do the campaign to catch up fully on Renown and all of that stuff, that is a lot of time that you have to spend. What is that?
Especially out? It's several hours of gameplay, plus several days if you're a Kyrian as well, but several hours for the other Covenants.
It's probably getting about the 6 to 7 hour mark of gameplay, or several days.
Have you played a Kyrian character?
No.
I don't know if you've had the pleasure. Okay, the
I've heard about this.
It is legitimately 3 or 4 times as long as the other campaigns. It's real bad.
I've heard about that. But yeah, I think that's it. If you want, you can check down at this Wowhead article down in the description. Of course, we want to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions on the matter. Do you think that alts should be equally as hard as mains? Do you think that we are about right in the element where we think they should be about half as long or something like that? We want to hear your guys' thoughts on the matter, and make sure to leave those down in the comments of this article. We will see you guys in the next video. Bye.
Later.